And I'm delighted to say a very good morning on a bank holiday Monday to Peter Hitchens. Peter, how are you?
Good morning.
Nice to talk to you on a bank holiday. I assume, like me, you're one of those people that doesn't really pay much attention to bank holidays. I'm not quite sure why we have them. I'm not quite sure why banks have them. It doesn't really seem to make much sense in the modern world, does it?
It was a great thing in the Victorian Edwardian period when people didn't have paid holidays, but I do think it's pretty obsolete now. So why have a Monday as a holiday? I never understood why that.
Well, as opposed to a Friday.
No, Friday's a great holiday. I would completely disagree with you. Friday is a great day to have off. When I used to work every Sunday on the old Daily Express, I had Friday off, and it was a marvelous day off.
Yes. No, listen, I'm like you. I'm not saying Friday's a bad day to have off. I've always worked various different times. I've worked Christmas Day, I've worked New Year's Day, New Year's Eve. I don't really care. Whatever has to be done has to be done. I just think we have far too many people now in this country, and particularly now, even more probably, since they've all been working from home, who don't like working very much.
Well, I mean, who really does?
Well, I do, actually. I love working.
Take Ronald Reagan's line on this. He was told when he was young that hard work never killed anybody, but he wasn't going to try and find out if it was true.
That's a great Reaganism.
A few weeks working at a brewery in Oxford in my teens, the hardest job I ever did.
Yes.
And I have to say, it struck me that if I did it for a very long time, it probably would have killed me.
Well, listen, people will say to me, you've never done a hard day's work in your life, look at the state of you and all that. I used to work in a bakery where you would stand on your feet for literally sort of 10 hours a day in searing heat in the middle of the summer, picking the bits of green leaf out of strawberries and putting hot jam on things. And I mean, that was proper work. And I freely admit that I wouldn't have wanted to do it for the rest of my life. And that's why I take my hat off to anyone who does a real job.
Well, Mr. Hitchens works in a yard egg factory, which made the yard-long eggs they put in pork pies. So it's always
my God. Now, I've always wondered how they do that. How do they do that?
I can tell you it's a long and rather disgusting process involving plastic tubing, but it was probably the smelliest job.
Oh, yeah.
Even smellier than the pigsty I once mucked out.
Yes. Well,
don't tell me I never did.
I know. But this is the vagaries of working as a journalist. You always get accused of never ever having to have done an honest day's work, and they're often wrong. And in our case, they obviously are. Let's talk a bit about a man who probably hasn't ever done a decent day's work in his life, and that's Dominic Cummings, who you quite rightly pointed out wanted to actually appoint a sort of dictator to this country, and is one of those people that we seem to have a lot of now who think they're better than everybody else.
Well, it's not that he thinks he's better. I think he does think, and I think he has reason to believe that he's cleverer than most people. But he thinks that this should go unrestrained as a result. And I think the problem with a free society is that however clever you are, you in fact, the cleverer you are, the more you need people around you who are as clever as you, or nearly as clever as you, to say, well, actually, no, that might not be a good idea, Mr. Lord Protector, or whatever
Yes.
he called himself. There has to be, in any system of government, at least one person who's prepared to say to the man in charge, no, that's a mistake. This is that great, very left-wing, but very clever television series, The West Wing, was founded on this. Again and again, what the close advisors of the President of the United States had to do was to say, you've got this wrong. You can't do it. And it was their job. And it took a lot of courage to do, because powerful people can be extremely angry when crossed. But the whole point of having an independent civil service is to have very senior people who can say, no, Prime Minister, you can't do that. And there's the sort of form of government which Dominic Cummings seems to be yearning for. It's a form, of course, which can only be justified by a huge crisis, such as the COVID problem has been alleged to be. And in those circumstances, people like him move into it's what they were born for. And he suddenly saw an opportunity to exercise the power and the intellect that he has. Well, as I say, I don't doubt he's a clever person.
But I found it, I found it strangely comforting, rather like what you said the other week about, how it was sort of strangely comforting that we were thinking about going back to war with the French, because it's kind of where we are. I found it strangely comforting that here was a man accusing one of the men who runs one of the top departments in the government, the Secretary of State for Health, of being more or less a congenital liar, and also saying that the man who he had helped to get elected was not fit to do the job. I was comforted by the fact that all of those things he said seemed to have almost no impact at all on either of the men that he was attacking.
Well, it was interesting, was it? Though I think that what you might call the dictatorial left, who longed for us to be.
Oh, they loved it.
Constantly held down under these measures, and who completely agreed with Mr. Cummings' view that the government had failed to act promptly enough, and that people had died because they hadn't closed our society down thoroughly enough, which is still completely a disputed claim. They certainly felt that what he said was good. I think most people are actually, and I certainly, there's never been, since all this began, so much activity in the streets and in the shops and in workplaces. There is a genuine feeling now, for the first time, of a return to something like normal. Nobody wanted, I think, to hear the voice of somebody who apparently wanted a return to abnormal as quickly as possible. And I think that probably meant that his only welcome came from Islington and places like that, where he is now a hero. I believe portraits of him being placed in town halls and busts are being constructed.
Quite.
And our great leader and mentor, Dominic Cummings.
But didn't it also point to the sort of Westminster bubble? And, you and I both know lots of people who work inside it, many of whom are very estimable people. But it is a world of its own where, I was talking to Peter Cardwell, who's our sort of commentator, used to be a special advisor in Downing Street, very excited about the whole prospect of it all happening. And I mean, most people, ordinary people, are like, well, so what? So all our politicians are liars. It doesn't matter. We knew that anyway.
Well, yes, it's true. In some ways, it's a good thing that people shrug over the scrolls of the powerful. In some ways, it's a bad thing because they fail to notice in important matters. By the way, the fuss about Dominic Cummings is extraordinary. The concentration on this particular person, in my way, far more interesting. Is the head of the Prime Minister's policy unit, a woman called Munira Mirza, who is, how shall I put this, has had associations with the old Revolutionary Communist Party, which is now developed through living Marxism and spiked online. Is a very left-wing person indeed. And I argue with people who left-wing people who think that Johnson is a terrific right-wing. I say, how is it that if he is such a right-winger, he has such a person in such a senior position in Downing Street? It's a very, very important position. No one ever discusses it. There's always Dominic Cummings. Hardly ever Munira Mirza, who is in many ways more interesting.
Oh, very much so. But also, very few people aside from you picked up on his quote, which I found quite extraordinary, about this of having a sort of benign scientific dictator in charge of everybody, who presumably would tell everybody how to behave, and who would presumably insist on them behaving that way under some kind of pain of punishment.
Well, this is the dream of the utopian all the time, that you are so good and so clever, and you're so badly needed by a society in danger that you should have all power. And the problem with this is that it very, very quickly leads to a total intolerance of criticism or dissent. And that is why utopia is always surrounded by a sea of blood. In the end, it cannot bear criticism. It cannot bear anybody saying, hang on, wait. And this is a whole state of mind that needs to be restrained. Of course, you can have people in Whitehall who think like that, but you've got to have a lot more people who are there to say, no, you can't do that. And you've also got to have a parliament and an opposition which are prepared to stand up to it. And you've also got to have courts and judges who are prepared to stand up to it. And this is the really worrying thing about the past year. Those mechanisms have not worked. And so we're driving along very fast in a car with no brakes.
Yes. I mean, are you encouraged in any way, shape or form by the Telegraph this morning, where it says UK vaccine passport plans to be scrapped? I mean, I get the sense that they are beginning to realise that a lot of the things that they've talked about are never going to work and should not be entertained and should not even be attempted to be tried.
Well, in my experience in the past 20 years or so, all attempts to confine us and identify us and surveil us are defeated, possibly at the first, second or third attempt, but the people who want these things persist. So I wouldn't necessarily relax and say that just because at the moment things are going in the opposite direction, that there will never be any such demands on us to identify ourselves and to produce our health records. The creation of the surveillance state and the creation of the identity card state continues brick by brick all the time. And I see no sign that the desire for this to happen is going away. So I wouldn't be too relaxed about it if I were you.
No, okay. Well, I'm slightly more optimistic, I suppose, than you are.
Well, that's always a dangerous thing to be, Mike.
I know.
Optimism is the key to unhappiness.
Well, it's like they say, it's the
best way to make yourself miserable in the world.
It's the hope that kills you, as they always say. Before we get to Call the Midwife, which I'd love to talk about in a moment, let's talk a little bit about Mr. Lukashenko, because you talked about Belarus many moons ago, I suppose I would say, and once again you've been proved correct.
Well, I think so. I went there some years ago on a visit. At the time, actually, various people associated with the Tory party were having talks with Mr. Lukashenko to try and improve his image, right, amusingly enough. But
presumably he said, no thanks, look what you did to David Cameron.
Well, I can't remember how that ended. They certainly didn't succeed in remaking him.
No.
But it took a little bit. It's a fascinating place, by the way. It's not. It's much more complicated. Minsk is a surprisingly pleasant city. You can go and see Lee Harvey Oswald's flat where he lived when he lived in the Soviet Union. It's very green, and it's pretty much like the Soviet Union would have been if it had worked. But it also still has a KGB, and people do genuinely disappear. They arrive at the airport and they don't arrive home, and no one ever sees them again. It's really very sinister indeed. And I wrote an article about this in which I was quite rude about Mr. Lukashenko's comb over, which I said was a demonstration of the fact he was a dictator, because if he in a free country it would have been mocked out of existence. Yeah. And ever afterwards, whenever I was going eastwards in the general direction of Moscow, I would never go by train across Belarus, because I really was quite afraid that some sort of revenge might be taken. Yeah. And my family said, "Oh, don't be silly," and laughed at me, but they're not laughing now.
No, but did you ever sense that there was anyone sort of following you? Because I mean, I'm fascinated. No. I'm fascinated by this kind of soft government-inspired terrorism that the Russians do here, that we know that China does here as well, but that I've never sort of witnessed.
No, there was a very extraordinary thing, though. I took really enormous care to try and find independently a citizen of Belarus who would talk to me freely. And I ended up doing this on a moving train, a completely chance encounter with a rather beautiful young woman. And she was so filled with the joys of the country that I thought either it must be quite nice, or the Belarus security and intelligence services were even cleverer than I thought, and had actually known what train I was going to get on, and plant her in the next compartment. It was amazing. I don't know. They could have been. She could have been a plant, or she could have been real. And to this day, I can't make up my mind. But the sophistication of surveillance these days is so great that it's quite possible they knew exactly where I was at every minute and were able to do that.
Yes, I do think it's a worrying situation. And I mean, again, like all things in this modern world in which we live, the story of the kidnapped blogger seems to have disappeared from the news rounds now. Nobody's talking about it. You know, he'll probably disappear at some point or other, and nobody will really notice. And I'm sorry that the news business now has such a short attention span. They don't seem capable of actually following a story for more than about 3 days.
You're right. We should keep at it. I mean, these people are held in terrible conditions and treated extremely badly, and are in great danger. And people should make it fast, both in the media and indeed by. I don't know whether Amnesty International still does its excellent letter writing campaigns, but these people do have to be kept in the public mind, because it does make a difference, and it does sometimes prevent them from being even worse treated.
Yeah, because you can imagine the scenes in Belarus if they're all sitting around a table going, well, nobody cares in the West, so therefore we might just do what we want.
Well, quite. So if you have time to write polite letters to the embassy of Belarus, or indeed to Mr. Lukashenko, it may seem futile, but in fact, if enough people do it, certainly in the old Soviet era, if enough people do it, it does make a difference. And you're quite right. We in the media should continue to draw attention to this, because it's shocking.
Well, I shall try and continue to do so. Let's talk about Call the Midwife, finally, because, of course, I, like you, have been sort of, shall we say, dismayed by the way every single BBC show now, television-wise and even movies that they make, have become so kind of woke and so ridiculous that you just can't really watch them.
Well, this one, this started out as a sort of very rather nice, quite sweet Technicolor exercise in nostalgia about a group of nuns and midwives in a part of East London, for which people were a bit nostalgic. I would say it's now become almost entirely a propaganda vehicle. Every plot line seems to be designed to reinforce some politically correct nostrum, but it's particularly so on the question of abortion. I think there have now been 4 episodes in which the topic of abortion has come up. And here we have, interestingly, a series based around a group of nuns. Now, I think they're supposed to be Anglican nuns, but even so, such people would in 1965, 66 have been quite opposed to abortion on principle. It's just you could assume it, and they would have. So would other people have been. It was not. I remember I was alive at the time. I remember a lot of people were really happy about abortion being made easier. And what I find particularly upsetting about this is the way in which the debate is misrepresented. What people don't know is that abortion was in fact legal under certainly quite strict circumstances, actually as a result of a court case back in 1939 involving a doctor called Alec Bourne. And although it was difficult, it was not impossible. And a lot of the propaganda which was put forward by people who wanted to liberalize it was not very well based. And I refer repeatedly to a fascinating article on legalized abortion, which can be found in the archives of the British Medical Journal to this day, from April 2nd, 1966, which points out that a lot of the claims made about huge numbers of dangerous illegal abortions simply aren't founded in any discoverable facts. And it's very clearly written by very well informed and highly qualified people. I do recommend it to anybody. It's a bucket of cold water in the face of a lot of the stuff that you hear. It's not reflected in the plots to call the Midwife. And I've written to the BBC about this. I complain to the BBC because I think you have to do what you can. And the response I get is completely ridiculous. First of all, they say, pretty much it's not biased at all, which it obviously is. And secondly, and even if it is biased, drama should not be governed by the rules on impartiality because it doesn't have any effect. Actually, if you want to affect people's minds, a drama, especially a well-presented popular drama, is a much better way of propagandizing than some documentary or somebody lecturing you on a talking heads show.
Yes.
It's incredibly powerful. And everybody remembers Cathy Come Home, the great drama about homelessness. Hardly anybody remembers the dozens of documentaries that the BBC put out at the same time on the same subject. Drama really affects people.
Well, and also it gets much bigger numbers in the same way that Call of Duty has now become a kind of a treatise about how corrupt the police are. It doesn't talk about a section of the police who are investigating a very low number of corruption cases. It basically paints a picture that all police are corrupt.
It's true, and it's been a good series. But what one wants is another series about. I would love to see a series, for instance, about the destruction of proper foot patrol beat policing in the 60s, and say you had a hero who really believed in this, who was constantly under pressure from the authorities to give up what he was doing. It would be a fascinating thing to do, and you could have an episode of Call the Midwife in which the disadvantages of freely available abortion were explored, and the decent, likable character who put forward the other case. I don't want the dramas themselves to be forced into balance by some sort of commissar, but I do want more than one side of the argument to be.
And you're quite right. I remember these days as well that at the time the use of sort of what they used to call backstreet abortionists was the massive kind of hammer with which they used to crack the nut and to say to everybody, well, we have to make it legal in all cases because otherwise women are going to die in these backstreet abortion clinics. And as you say, there was no real evidence to back that up.
Well, in fact, the evidence tends to point the other way, unless there's an extraordinarily good survival rate, higher than practically any other form of surgery. It just doesn't seem to have happened. And as I say, if you ask most people, they will say abortion was completely illegal until 1967. It's just not true. The Alec Bourne case is fascinating. It arose from an underage girl being raped by 3 soldiers on Whitehall, and the doctor, who was actually against abortion, deciding he was going to abort her baby because he thought she'd probably go mad if she went to term. And he was tried and acquitted, and it completely changed the law. And it's a fascinating episode in British history, almost entirely unknown because it counters the prejudices of the people who now run our culture.
Yeah, literally rewriting history, would you believe?
Well, sort of, but leaving things out.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, Mail on Sunday columnist, as ever. Fascinating stuff. Very interesting. Lots of things to discuss there. Lots of things to debate. Lots of things to mull over. because that's what we do here at Talk Radio. We ask you to think about what you listen to. We ask you to think about what you watch. We ask you to think about it. Tell us what you think of it, and then we get a proper debate going. 0344 499 1000 is the number, because we are, of course, not only the home of common sense, we are the headquarters of it, no less. This is Talk Radio.